Hope you all got a cup of coffee and are ready for what is always the most popular section of our transportation conference. So we are going to go ahead and start our legislative panels. Before we do that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Lance Giles. As many of you know, Lance is our lobbyist at the Idaho Walk Bike Alliance, and he's been with us for about 3 years now. Lance has worked for the Governor Dirk Kempthorne as his policy advisor, and he has about 10 years of experience as a staffer working around Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. So he's got lots of experience, and we were thrilled to have him as our lobbyist to help us out. Lance, do you want to go ahead and introduce your panel?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I just want to say we're really thankful to have such a slice of the legislature. This, as Cynthia says, this is one of our more popular sessions every year, and it's just great to have a group of legislators from both the House and the Senate, Republicans, Democrats, to get together for the opportunity for us to get to know you and for you to get to know us. And so we've got 4 members of the legislature today. We've got Senator Jim Woodward, we've got Senator Melissa Wintrow, Representative Brooke Green, and Representative James Holtzclaw. And what I'd like to kind of start off with today is just to have them introduce themselves, tell them a little bit about them, tell them about their legislative district that they represent, their particular responsibilities in the legislature, and then just kind of what inspired them to become a legislator in the first place. So I'll just kind of kick that off with Senator Wintrow first, since she's on the left of my screen there. So it's just the easiest part. So I'll kick it off to you.
Thank you, Lance. And it's so good to be here and see all these folks on the call. I know folks are getting a little Zoom crazy, but just thank you for coming. I represent Boise's District 19, which is Boise proper up into the river and back into the foothills, into Hidden Springs and Avamore. And I first ran for the legislature in 2014 because somebody tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, I think you'd be good at this." And I looked at them initially and said, "Are you crazy?" I was scared to death, but chose to run. I'm so glad I did, because serving in this way is a gift. And I think the one thing that I'm really just pleased about is I've been able to take my experience working as a women's center director and working with victims of crime and passing legislation and working with stakeholders to pass legislation to help victims of crime. So what a gift to be able to take experience from a citizen, as a citizen's legislature into policy work. So, I mean, that's a little bit about me, but I'm just so honored to be here. And currently I'm in the Senate. I started in the House for 6 years, and my committees are transportation, judiciary and rules, and health and welfare. And in my prior time in the House, I worked 4 years with Senator Woodward in the Joint Finance and Appropriations Committee. So I learned a ton from him, especially because he's an engineer. So really grateful for that time.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Representative Green.
Hi, thank you, Lance, and thank you, Cynthia, for the invitation to come and be present today. I am certainly thrilled to have this opportunity. It is quite a privilege, seeing that I wear 2 hats. So a little bit about me: I am a transportation planner at ECHD, and so been here about 6 years. But prior to that, I worked for CTAI as a transportation mobility manager. In essence, what that means is I spent a lot of my time in District 3, which is ITD's District 3, doing work for mobility management and more or less public transportation. So I'm full circle. I'm all public transportation and transportation planning, and it's quite interesting to have those 2 experiences. As it pertains to my work in the legislature, I actually had no intention to run. This was something, just like Senator Wintrow had highlighted, somebody just tapped me on the shoulder and asked. And that was when Brandon Durst had stepped down. And at that time, it was an open appointment. And so I went through that process, and I remember walking in and for the interview, and they said, "Hey, you need to sign as a Democrat." And I was like, "Oh, I was so clueless about politics at that time. I just wanted to do good work in my community, regardless at that time, whether it be Republican or Democrat. And so I signed on and did not get that appointment, but later, actually Minority Leader Alana Rebel took me under her wing, and for 6 years I had the privilege of subbing to get a taste of it, and then ran for a full election. And I've been in there for 2 terms. I'm on business, local government, and JFAC. And I will tell you, while I'm here and while I hold this seat of privilege, it is everything I can do. More importantly, recently, I would like to work more towards behavioral health initiatives. And so I've been spending a lot of time working on that and bringing that lens to the legislature to actually be able to help our communities a little bit better. That is something I'm very much passionate about. And certainly I'm not going to discount doing all the work I can in advancing transportation in Idaho and helping where I can in that arena. So it's a little bit about me, and I will hand it back to you, Lance.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks.
Really appreciate that intro. Senator Woodward.
Well, good morning. Thanks for having me here. It's great to see some of these faces that I know. Yeah, you picked a great some people other than maybe myself, but I represent District 1, so that's the northern 2 counties, starting from the Canadian border coming down, so a long ways from Boise. I'm in my 3rd year in the legislature. I've been on JFAC since I started. I'm also on transportation this year, or this term, and I've been serving on the education committee since I started. In regards to the topic today, I would share that I was a runner for 20 years. Hip dysplasia got the best of me, and I'm not a runner anymore by the doctor's orders. Bicyclist also. I don't think I've spent as much time on a bicycle as Senator Wintrow, but I have ridden from northern Idaho and done over to Yellowstone and done the figure 8 in Yellowstone. And I can tell you that left a long-lasting impression on me that in Yellowstone, where the parks that are so crazy now that people get up in the morning and race to the next campsite to try and get a campsite. But in that park, in my experience, there were hiker, biker reserved campsites. And so we could come in at 3 in the afternoon, always guaranteed a spot, and those spots were open, and you just roll right in. And so I understand some of the value of the effort made here. And I'll tell you, I'm 50 now. I got a 1-wheel this year, so maybe I'm not running as much, but I did get a 1-wheel, and I learned the hard way what a 1-wheel nosedive is. If you're not familiar with that, just do a search on YouTube for a 1-wheel nosedive, and you'll see what I did. But if you see somebody in a suit and tie headed to the Capitol on 1-wheel this year, that'll be me. So that gives you a little bit of flavor that I do like the hiking, the biking, so on. At the same time, I make my living as a contractor here in northern Idaho and operate a small fleet of heavy trucks, oftentimes wide load, long load, and so there I look for the balance of where it's appropriate to make these efforts, but also still accommodating the infrastructure that we have to have for the other part of transportation, not just the humans, but moving things around. We work a lot on residential construction, do marine construction, so all the time hauling things that are 60 feet long, and so it's always in the back of my mind, how are we going to get through here? And we have some successful pieces here in Sandpoint that have worked well. The roundabouts that accommodate that those large trucks, and some other examples. But so happy to be supportive of the effort. Thanks.
Representative Holtzclaw, welcome. I think you're on mute.
I think you're right. Hey, and good morning, and thank you so much for the invitation. It's such a pleasure to talk to you about this important issue, for sure. You know, I was in the military for about 10 years, and after getting out, I worked in my community, volunteering, doing different things, sharing different things, and I just had a strong urge just an urge to help my community. And so that is why I chose to run for the legislature. And it's been great. It's been very rewarding. It's been an honor every day. You know, I walk up there every January, depending, but anyway, about every day. And I just look at that beautiful building, and I think what an honor it is for all these people to elect me to represent them in this beautiful state house that we have. You know, I think it's important work that we're doing, and we're going to talk about today. I think safe routes to school, especially, is high on my priority. I told Cynthia this story. I won't. Well, you know what, I will. So when I was about 5 years old, we used to walk to school, me and my buddy Kevin and his sister, and every day. So I was raised in Georgia, and we were in kindergarten, and I knew him ever since I was a kid. Grew up together as, you know, 6-year-olds do. We play out in the mud and get dirty together and play trucks and whatever else. And our moms and fathers were good friends. So anyway, one day woke up, I had a fever. My mother said, "Hey, you're not going to school today." So when Kevin and his sister came by, you know, "Hey, he's can't go today." So on the way to school that day, they got hit by a car, and Kevin perished that morning. And it was due, I think, not only inattentive driving, but also in the South, we don't have a lot of sidewalks. We have ditches, and no good safe routes to school. So I feel that it's imperative for us and all kids. All they want to do is go to school and learn. Why can't we give them a safe route to do so? And I think that's important. So that's the reason I'm really excited to talk about these issues today. So thank you.
Thank you. So what we're going to do next is I'll just ask some questions and just have you guys kind of just jump in. And I'll just kind of point. I'll start off probably just because everybody on the screen, it's Wintro, Green, Woodward, and Holtzclaw. So I'll just kind of go that way just because that's the way it looks on my screen. But the first question I have is, you know, it just looks like COVID-19 is going to be here for another session. Last year, the State House made some accommodations so folks could testify or interact with the legislature a little differently than they had in the past. And so I just wanted to start off with Senator Wintro. Do you think, is that going to be still the case? Is the public going to be able to access the legislature via Zoom or phone call, you know, to testify and things like that? Or is it going to just go back to being in person? So I'll just kick it off with you, I guess.
Thanks, Lance. I'm going to invite Senator Woodward to join me in this conversation. Last year, we provided, and each of the House and the Senate may do things a little bit differently, so I'll just comment on the Senate side. But last year we did provide, and Senator Woodward, tell me if I'm wrong on that. In all my communities, I know we did provide for Zoom testimony and folks to electronically connect and virtually. My guess is that'll continue because we've seen it over the summer in our working groups and our other interim committees. So that's my sense. I don't know, Senator Woodward, what you would say. I would, though, encourage folks to I guess I just want to say at this point, I encourage folks to, you know, if they do come to the State House, they're welcome, and to, you know, look at personal safety, social distancing, and masking, and, you know, vaccinations are helpful. You know, I think people miss being there in person, and it really does impact advocacy. So as safe, you know, I'm encouraging us all to come, you know, be safe, mask up, be cognizant of others and respectful of other people's space, and recognize that people want folks to participate in their government, and we want it to do safely for everyone. Senator Woodward, would you add to that, or?
I think you're muted, Senator.
I'm acting like a beginner here today on Zoom. Like I haven't tried this before. I agree with you, Senator Wintrow, that I believe the remote testimony will continue to be an option. I think that it's the chair of the committee is deciding that, but it works well. I think it's almost, there's a little bit of irony that we had a pilot program going before COVID, and we were making a kind of a big deal about the ability to do it. And chose just one or two committees. But last year, when push came to shove, all of a sudden it was pretty easy to allow people to testify remotely, and it works just fine in the committees. Typically don't have any problem, and so that's if there is a benefit to anything that's happened in the last year, I would say that the ability for people all over Idaho, for people from all over Idaho to better participate in the legislative process, I think that's a good thing.
Representative Green, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, no, I think both the senators covered it pretty well. You know, the House side, certainly we saw a influx of people being able to present and be able to communicate in our committees, whereas otherwise in previous years, they actually had to come down and do it in person. And so to Senator Woodward's point, the ability for folks in all of Idaho to have a seat at the table and have that discussion and speak to committees and their representatives, I think was a tremendous. And I don't anticipate any other changes. I'm on the Legislative Council, and I can't recall, we haven't gotten into the discussion about what it's going to look like this next session, but I don't think it's going to be any different than what we had. And to Senator Wintrow's point, you know, mask up if you feel comfortable, come down. You know, there's a risk. I think last year we saw several folks, you know, majority of the people who showed up weren't necessarily masked. And so just be cognizant that that's kind of the environment you're going to be walking into, and take your own care to ensure your safety, and know that that other option is still available to you.
Okay, Representative Holtzclaw. I think you're muted again, sorry.
Sometimes I wish I had one of these buttons for others. So I am a chairman of Commerce and Human Resources, and it's pretty much the chairman's what they want to do. I've been in the legislature, this will be my 10th year, and boy, we struggled to get people to come down and testify. We wanted people to come down and testify. And, you know, and then the COVID thing hit, and then we, you know, the Zoom thing. And if nothing good came out of it, you know, at least we get the opportunity to allow people from all over the state to be involved in the process. And I expect it's going to be exactly like it was last year. There's kind of going to be a hybrid, probably, you know, we're probably going to take testimony for in person, a couple, and then a couple from Zoom, and then go back and forth. So that's what I anticipate it looking like.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
And then what is, I'll just circle back to Senator Wintrow and just go down the line again. What's the best way for the Idaho Walk Bike Alliance members to reach out to you? What's the most effective way to share their point of view?
Well, as with anyone, call, email. If somebody, I mean, I've been taking in-person meetings, but requiring masks, you know, like, and social distancing. So yeah, all the usual ways to do that. You can call me, you can email me, and if you want, you can meet in person again. We'll just figure out the safety issues.
Okay. Representative Green.
Yeah, I actually emphasize, you know, phone calls are probably the easiest. Certainly Cynthia knows how to get a hold of all of us. I will say, however, if you're going to do email, just realize that we get hundreds of emails in a day. And several of those are form letters. So if your intent is to participate and you have something really passionate to talk about, share that with us, but share it in your own voice. We get lots of form letters, and you know, they all group together after a while. So if you're going to want to get in touch with us, certainly phone call is actually easier for me. In addition to that, if you're going to email us, but email in your own voice, and certainly that's the best way. And back to the point where Senator Wintrow is, if we meet, I do ask that people wear masks as well, and certainly we can take precautions as necessary.
Okay, thanks. Senator Woodward.
Oh, I think that Representative Green hit it really. If you write an email, every email I get from someone in my district who has written it and then I read and respond to, but we get the same email over and over. In fact, the subject line is the same over and over. So without even opening the email, you know it's the same thing. And so if someone hasn't put any thought into their message, I'm not sure that a lot of thought then ends up going back in that reply. So just take the time to make your, instead of one-click politics or my voice or one of these other where you just get to hit something and you agree with the message that's being sent, even if you haven't read it thoroughly. Just take the time to put 1 or 2 sentences even, and that definitely is more effective in reaching us. But the email is the best on your schedule. I'm trying to catch us during the day. The cell phone can be difficult, but or phone and text also work. But the email probably works best for everybody.
Okay. Representative Holtzclaw.
Sure. So when we're in session, I think the best way to communicate with the legislators or, coming down there and talking to them in person. I mean, especially if it's important to you, given the fact that, you take the necessary precautions in relation to the mask and everything else people want you to do. I think outside of that, for me, yeah, phone call, email, I'll meet you in person. And I do that throughout the week. So, constituency services are very important. It's a big part of my job, and it's a very important part of my job. And I encourage you to reach out to your legislators, and they can really help you out a lot if you have a problem. So that's what I would do.
Okay. Well, thanks everyone.
Mhm.
Now we're going to jump into a little policy here. So Idaho's once again expecting a large fiscal surplus. In the past, including last year, Idaho spent $2 million to fund the Idaho Child Pedestrian Safety Program, which is managed by LTAC. This has been a real successful program. It's built a lot of standalone walking and biking projects like sidewalks, crosswalks, beacons, all kinds of things like that. It's not a lot of money, but it's making a big difference. Once again, we've, Idaho Walk Bike Alliance has put in that request to JFAC to provide some more money for this program, and we wanted to see what you guys were thinking about funding it again, at least at 2 million or maybe more with the surplus. Just every time I look at the newspaper, it seems like it keeps growing for some reason. So anyway, I'll hit Senator Wintrow this time again, start us off.
Well, I think I first want to clarify that, I don't know that I call it a budget surplus. I might be a little bit in the minority there, but I think over time, as I sat on JFAC for 4 years, I saw many times challenging my colleagues about we're tightening the belt too much. And we're seeing state agencies really struggle. And we're seeing that right now in our employee salaries and compression. I can give example after example. I work with the state police a lot and the forensics lab, and the governor was kind enough to give a bonus to the police, but the civilians who work just as hard are struggling. And in the sexual assault kit area, I keep losing coordinators from that. So we actually passed legislation to get those things off shelves and get them tracked and processed to hold people accountable. But now we can't keep the staff and the DNA scientists do it. And that's about salaries. So I am advocating and helping people understand this is not necessarily a surplus. I think it's an under budgeting problem and a growth issue, right? So I know some of my colleagues, I listened into the committee on ARPA funds, and there were questions about, what is the surplus about? Is it because of the infusion of federal funds? Is it because of growth? What does everything entailed? But I don't think you can dismiss the fact that we are growing at an exponential rate, and that increases income tax and sales tax revenues and so forth. So my suggestion is to reinvest that back into the agencies that we have been starving for years. And you can look to child protection, you can look to infrastructure, you can look to education, etc. I think some of that surplus is because of some of the infused federal dollars, but we didn't take it all, and we won't use it all. So I don't think we can dismiss the amount of growth. And when we have growth, that means more people, and more people require services. And you know, when they dial a number to get something, they want to have a person on there. So just to address that. Now, regarding the safe routes to school, I'm all in favor of that. I would support that, you know, day and night. There's plenty of funds there to ensure livability and walkability in our communities and safety, like Representative Holtzclaw said. I absolutely think we need to invest there, maybe a little bit more, because it's such a big bang for the buck. And if we can save one life, so be it. That is worth it. And I know this summer over and over, I saw folks getting hit in crosswalks, and you know, we got to do better there. So I'm going to be quiet now and turn it over. Sorry.
Okay. Well, since you mentioned Representative Holtzclaw, I'll just kick it over to you to mix it up for a second here.
Well, I will try to mix it up. I don't know if I can, but I'll give it a good shot. I think, you know, it's a surplus. You know, it's the people's money after all. You know, government only has money because the people give, because of the people. I think we ought to do a little bit of everything. I think we ought to give a little bit of that money back. I think we absolutely have to invest in our future, infrastructure, roads, schools. That's just what we have to do. I also think it's important for people to know what they're getting for their money. So we probably need to do a good job in saying, hey, look, we're investing this, and this is the money that we're spending, and this is how it's going to affect us in the next 10, 15, 20, 50 years. Because what we do today, maybe not will impact maybe, you know, us in the next couple of years, but certainly in the next generation, you know, or next decade or two. So we got to be vigilant of that. And on top of that, we're talking about inflation. So, you know, as much as I don't like inflation, you know, today's dollar is more valuable today than it will be tomorrow. So we need to make those strategic investments to get the best bang for our buck.
Okay. Senator Woodward.
You bet. Thank you. I guess I should say my wife served as Safe Routes to School coordinator here for the local school district for a few years, so I might be a little bit biased. Yes, I see the value of those programs, and she did that for a number of years, and I got the dinner time story just all the time about how that was working and those improvements were being made. So yeah, happy to support. When we talk about the budget and the budget surplus, or I sometimes say revenues in excess of anticipated, as Senator Windrow has mentioned. In last year, what we did, that approach we took last year was I think a typical Idaho balanced approach. If you look at the money that we had that was in excess of the earlier budget, we broke that up and we made large investments, long-term investments. We also put a portion of that into rainy day funds, as we try to set aside enough money to put ourselves in a position like we were prior to the 2008 recession, because we need to look at some people will say we have more money in rainy day funds now than we did then, but if you look at that as a percentage of budget, not just as total dollars, we're still not quite back where we were, and that was a tough storm to weather. When I talked to the governor's chief of staff from back then, the statement he made to me one time was that in those 3 years following 2008, they came to work for a full year and every day had to find $1 million to cut out of the budget. That's the kind of, with those rainy day funds. So my point there is to emphasize that by having those rainy day funds, we're better able to weather those times, and so we should work toward that. But in that balanced approach last year, we put money into long-term investments with transportation. We also put that money away, and then part of that package last year was that we returned some money to the taxpayer, and that was the 9% of your 2019 Idaho tax return, that those checks have recently come back, and gotten feedback from folks. Some folks say, why would you give this back? You should be spending more. And other people are very happy to see that come back. So that's about normal. We get a cross section of ideas on that. But when you look at the whole picture, not just the tax refund that happened, but the investments we made, I think it was the Idaho way. And so I'd look to see us do that again this year. And I think that some of the things you'll see coming up, again, an emphasis on long-term investments, probably bridge and culvert packages to go out, hopefully. The LTAC, the Local Highway Technical Assistance Council, I'm always a supporter of that group. They do a great job of helping the money to be spent with local decisions, or at the local level, and to make wise local decisions. So I always advocate that we use that process that we've used in the past, where we can put a pot of money at LTAC. You can put in through grant application for what your needs are, and then those needs can be prioritized across the state. And so then the last one I might comment on is this question of where is this money coming from that Senator Wintrow was talking about. And we do have a lot of this additional money in the state because we've seen so much money flow into the state. The last budget year, as the state of Idaho has a gross state product of about $80 billion, and we saw about $8 billion of additional federal money flow into the state. So every time that some of that money was used to buy an RV or a bicycle or whatever, we saw that the shortages that people were buying up all these things when there was money flowing into the individual and separate from the agencies. But all that sales tax money is coming into the state. The income tax money is coming into the state. So that's where we see this money flowing in, and we other than returning it, that money is there. And so we don't the money that comes to the agencies, especially, we're not typically making a decision on whether or not to take it. So I think it is wise to look to the future and build infrastructure that then the people who will repay some of this money that came off of a lot of that federal money is borrowed money. I call it the national credit card, and because it's come at the expense of our national debt. So if we're going to have to pay that back at some point, then we want to make sure that we're using that money wisely, and it's something that will last for a long time. The other part of that, yeah, I agree with Senator Wintrow. A lot of this is we see a huge amount of growth here in the state. So, and especially with the ability now for so many people in our rural areas, we see it much more that people come in with a salary from San Francisco or Portland or Seattle, and so their income then boosts our state revenues, but that creates other problems. That's a different discussion to start talking about housing for workforce for a lot of folks here. It's a real struggle, I know, across the state.
Thank you, Representative Green.
Yeah, thank you. And I echo much of what was said both previously, but in particular to this actual funding mechanism, this tool that we have. One of the things, I did a little bit of research looking into this, and being someone that works in transportation planning, but someone also who was the result, who I was injured in a crosswalk in a school zone on my way to school with my twin sister when I was 10. So I firsthand understand the importance of being able to invest in safe access for kids to navigate our streets, because no one under any circumstance, a child should not grow up with the long-term consequences of us not actually investing in infrastructure. They deserve that right to school. They deserve a safe place in which to walk. And, I do feel it is our responsibility to ensure that they have that. In particular to this funding tool, I actually am a big proponent of it. And I'd actually like to see more. We do need to invest more. And for someone in my job, part of my responsibilities is scoping projects. Now, each one of these projects that were funded through LTAC, there were 11 projects funded, but there were 65 requests. Each one of them was funded at $250,000. ISCO projects, I certainly understand that $250,000 doesn't go very far. And so it was 65 communities putting in applications for projects, and we're only funding 11 of them. A lot of our communities aren't getting safe access. They're not getting these sidewalks. They're not getting these pathways. They're not getting crossings to go to school. And so $2 million is only going to go so far. And, when we see the surplus of dollars coming in, I truly believe beyond education, which we have underfunded for several years, an opportunity is in front of us that we can invest in infrastructure. And now's the time in which to do it. Infrastructure is going to be around for the long term. And so while we have this surplus, besides investing in people, we also need to invest in education, and we also need to invest in our transportation. One-time expenditures, these are one-time projects. If we can get sidewalks, poured in some of our communities, if we can get pathways constructed or crossings, we're allowing our kids safe access to schools while we're also providing a place for people to navigate their streets. Back to the point about our surplus, to Senator Wintrow's point, we have underfunded our departments, our agencies. We saw the struggle just recently with our Department of Corrections, the fact that they were literally working, these folks, they were working overtime almost every day to be able to provide protection in our correctional system. And we just now recently gave them a bump in pay. We also saw, some issues arising here shortly is we've got a lot of people who are retiring. So while we have this surplus of dollars, while we want to invest in infrastructure, if we don't have people to do the job, I look specifically to IETD, if we don't actually give them an opportunity to hire well-qualified candidates, and candidates, they cost dollars. And these candidates, because of these transportation dollars coming in, both from the feds, they're going to go into private industry, and we're not going to have them working in our state agencies, our local highway districts, as well as our ITD, in our communities to be able to address some of these projects. And so while we have this surplus, we need to invest in people, we need to invest in education, and we need to look at opportunities to invest in transportation infrastructure. These are long-term investments that are going to get us better gain. And quite frankly, we need to give more than $2 million towards safe routes to school programming. Our kids deserve it, our communities deserve it, and $250,000 a project in today's dollars doesn't go very far. We're lucky, I've scoped $1 million projects, just sidewalk projects alone, that exceed that. And it's because of the environment in which they need to be installed, but also because of the costs associated with hiring consultants. Dollars aren't going very far. We need to look at that $2 million. We need to bump it up, and we need to fund more than 11 projects, 65 applications. So that's 50 some communities who didn't get a project in their community. And these are shovel-ready projects. So these are ready to go. Let's give them the funding to do it.
Thank you, Representative.
Can I add one little bit?
You bet.
Just wanted to say, I think I kind of left off on my idea when I talked about we have the money because of the federal money, and then growth causes that other. We see more money in here because of growth in the state, population growth, and so where I was going with that is that we need to make take that hard look and say, with all this additional growth, what is the appropriate level of spending to make sure that we put some of the infrastructure in place in Idaho so that we maintain our quality of life? Because I think that's the question it comes down to me is, are we spending at an appropriate level so that we can still get on the highway? And just what we've seen here with a 2-lane highway, no controlled access in northern Idaho, my quality of life, or the quality of life of all the folks around here, has changed significantly. You can't get on and off Highway 95 anymore because of the increase in population. If that increase in population is causing additional revenue at the state level, shouldn't that revenue then be used to make those improvements so we can get at least back to where we were, where you can pull up to the highway and look both ways and then get on the highway instead of waiting for the 9 cars in front of you for 15 minutes.
Yeah.
I really appreciate the senator saying that, because that is that really important recognition of growth paying for itself instead of on the backs of longtime Idahoans, right? And that's something we hear on a regular basis. So we have to figure that out. And I did want to comment to Katie in the chat about the budget. When the governor did 2 years in a row, did holdbacks. So that is a problem. I haven't seen the next budget for this coming year, but I don't know that those have been restored. But we do certainly feel that. And I can tell you, I work in health and welfare, and it is, they are hard pressed, especially for in-home care for folks who qualify, certified family homes. We are short-staffed. We have to do better with rate increases to make sure we have providers caring for the most vulnerable among us. And I think that's the role of government, and that's the Christian thing to do as well. So I just wanted to comment. I really appreciate Senator Woodward's balance on that.
Yeah, I appreciate everyone's thoughts there. I'm gonna skip a question here and then I'll just probably ask one more here, and then I'll open it up to our members. So last year there was a bill that was introduced to eliminate driver's training program requirements, including night driving hour requirements. The Idaho Walk Bike Alliance, we believe these programs are critical in teaching our young drivers to learn the rules of the road and their responsibilities and the challenges that they face while driving. Not sure if this is going to come back, but I have a feeling it might. And so I just wanted to get your thoughts on, continuing the supported drivers training. And part of it is that we heard during some of the testimony is that it's becoming more difficult in some of our rural areas and in some of our bigger areas that the state is not necessarily providing enough funding or classes for students to actually learn these programs. I know as someone who grew up in Idaho years ago in Meridian, that was just kind of a regular deal. In ninth grade, you went and took your driver's training class and then you were ready, did your driving with your parents, and then you were ready to go. But it seems that there's some challenges both, at the state education funding wise, and then also just, in general. But I think with all the growth that we've been talking about, it's important that our young 14-year-old drivers should take driver's training, and like to hear your thoughts on that. And I'll start with Representative Green this time.
Yeah, thank you. And I had to go back and look this one up because I recall it coming through, and I actually spoke to the individual who carried it, or the individual in Northern Idaho who was the advocate behind it. And no, I'm not okay with eliminating driver's ed. As much as I appreciate parent choice and parents' participation, I also participate a uniformed education when it comes to teaching our kids on how to navigate these streets with actual vehicles. And so I noticed, I did some looking into this. This came out of Transportation Committee to go to general orders, and it died. And so I would hate to see this come back. I would actually like it to stay where, I think it came out of general orders and then sent over to state affairs and never saw the light of day. I would hope that it actually finds its way sitting in state affairs and we don't see it on the floor, because we owe it to everyone who drives on these roads is to provide a uniform education on how to navigate those streets. And this takes that away. That puts that onus back on the parents, and all about parent choice, but this is not the time. We do need to adequately fund our local communities and give them the ability to do this. So no, I want it to stay away. I won't support it.
Senator Woodward.
I think we need to make sure everybody knows how to drive. It's getting more difficult to drive on the roads, not easier. When I come home from driving a big truck some days, I wish that driver's ed included at least a 1 hour ride in a semi truck, so you could understand what it takes to get a semi truck stopped before you pull in front of it. But that's just my little piece. But I do believe that we need to have driver's ed education. But I had the same perspective that that was what we did in high school. Is we just signed up. I went in early for school for one semester or one quarter and took driver's ed from the government teacher. And so I'm not sure why that's kind of gone off a little bit. It sounds like maybe it's having the money available at the school. We'll check on that.
Yeah, just circling back on that, what we heard from some of these smaller districts is they just don't have, the classes are filled up oftentimes, and there's just not enough funding there to have an extra teacher to teach these young drivers. So that's maybe in the education world, that's probably where this needs to be addressed, but I'll move it over to Representative Holtzclaw and see what he thinks here.
Yeah, of course you need driver training. I don't expect that bill to be heard this year. That's my thought.
Okay, and then last but definitely not least, Senator Wintrow.
I would say ditto. And thank goodness I had some professional drivers training, because my dad was so mean. He parked me on a hill and a clutch with a stiff clutch and said, all right, get yourself out of it. So I'm all for schools having drivers training.
All right, well, with that, I'm gonna Cynthia, I assume you've gotten I hope you've gotten a bunch of questions from the audience, and I'll kick it to you to ask some of those.
Okay, thanks, Lance. Thanks, everybody, for participating. This has been so interesting already. I'm going to start with a question in the chat. That was actually made, let's see, a little while ago, but it's a really good point. So I'll go ahead and read this question. Do the legislators support repealing the law that forces sidewalk responsibility for the ITD system onto locals? So the example that's given is Garden City down here near Boise. Garden City has to compete nationally for sidewalks on Chinden. Well, ITD they're widening Chinden out in Meridian. So that's going to get a multi-use pathway out there. Well, the section of Chinden in Garden City, the sidewalks are in disrepair or in some areas non-existent. So this is a question about, the state highway system, ITD, they are responsible for curb to curb when they go in and improve. So the sidewalks are out of their jurisdiction. And so would anybody like to comment on this type of question about repealing a law that impacts ITD? It's a big question. Senator Wintrow, do you want to answer that?
Wow, I put in the chat, I thought that was a great question. We should talk more about that. I think this notion of curb to curb, you need to look at the history, how that came and what the impacts are now long-term, and that maybe we should open that up. I'd be very interested in talking about that and learning more. Senator Woodward's an engineer and Brooke, Representative Green works in transportation, but I think we need to reduce the red tape, bureaucracy problems, because when we're building transportation system, we need to think beyond concrete and asphalt in between those curbs. It's a system, right? It's a multi-use, multimodal system. And so anytime we build a road, we better think about how folks are walking around it, biking around it, bus. I'd like to see more thought put into as we build, how we, build infrastructure for public transit. Boy, that's big, big, big in Boise to decrease the congestion. So I'm all for investigating and exploring the best solution there. But big picture, reduce the barriers to create a multimodal transportation system. And don't just think of transportation as an inch of asphalt my car can go on, because every inch you build, you got to maintain, and that just balloons the budget.
Thank you. Senator Woodward, would you like to answer that question also?
I'm not as familiar with that. So it must have been before my time, so I have not looked at that law.
Gotcha. Okay. Representative Holtzclaw?
I would have to look into that. I honestly don't know what part of that is true and how that works. I mean, as far as that curb to curb, because here in Meridian, I mean, we build out a road, we go all the way. I mean, sidewalk and everything. So, I mean, this is new construction. So I would have to learn more about that.
Okay. And Representative Green?
Yeah, thank you, Cynthia. And I make it a point not to commit to making a decision regarding any bills without seeing them first. And so while I recognize that there's a lot of inquiry that we need to do into this, I will speak a little bit to the constraints and the issues. And so being very familiar with Chinden and recognizing I drive by it every day to actually get to work. And so I certainly see the need. I have seen several occasions, one gentleman in a wheelchair navigating that space to be able to get to the grocery store. And so when we put reliance on local communities, but then we don't give local communities or these jurisdictions funding to build sidewalks, that's problematic. And we saw that. I worked on a project in my prior work with CTAI where we had to get creative and look to find a way to put sidewalks in McCall. Again, you have this highway that goes right into McCall, and we had to look to FTA funding actually, and that was transportation dollars for a bus stop. So from every bus stop, you can go 150 feet and you can install a sidewalk. And so that's what we did up in McCall, just so we can get sidewalks for people to navigate. And if you've been there in the winter, the sidewalks are essential, or you're going to get ran over by a car. And so while I don't know the nuances associated with the ITD and the repealing of that specific requirement, I do recognize that we do need to complete our streets. We do need to enhance them with bike facilities, in pedestrian facilities, as well as accommodating the vehicles. And we need to do it safe. And quite frankly, we needed to have done it yesterday. In particular, Chinden is very unsafe for people to cross that street, very unsafe for them to navigate it. And it does need to have enhanced facilities. And so everybody's kicking a can to some other jurisdiction to get the job done. I do believe ITD has a responsibility, and ITD should be making those enhancements. And we should, if not, let's fund our local communities and local jurisdiction with the appropriate dollars. Again, $250,000, just for sidewalk programming, that doesn't go very far in a local community, and especially if it's next to a highway. So if we're going to build these roads, we need to do it with every transportation consideration in mind. And to Senator Wintrow's point, it's a multimodal system that includes every means in which you can navigate through that space. And so I would like to look into that stipulation with ITD, but I'm not going to commit to anything until I see it and see what the repercussions could potentially be.
Great, thank you so much. And just for those, I know probably a lot of the local people are aware that a woman did die on Chinden and 38th just within the last couple of weeks, riding her bicycle. So we're seeing some fatalities happen along that corridor. I want to, let's see, I'm trying to see if there are other questions. There's a lot of really good comments in the chat, but I'm probably not going to read those and let all of you read them. Here's one from Deborah. Can we add bike on the road training? Many cyclists and car drivers don't know cyclist traffic rules. So I don't know if any of the legislators want to answer that. I think that's a really valid point.
I'd say a little bit of something on that, Cynthia, because I was just thinking of it. There's some substance there to getting people comfortable with the bicycles and working around them, because I just know from my own experience about 7 or 8 years ago, I was going down every so often and riding in Orange County with a friend who lived there. And I was more comfortable riding my bicycle on the 6th lane in Orange County because the people were comfortable with the bikes but respected the bicycles. And I think sometimes we get pushed off the road. Not that I do a lot of cycling anymore, but there's just can be a different perspective of bicycles. And so not that I want to be out there saying that California is an example for us, but if people are comfortable with the bicycles being out there and realize that that's one way to travel, then, and not just trying to shove them out of the way. So.
I would add to that. I really appreciate that perspective. Senator Woodward referenced this earlier, but I rode my bicycle across the United States in the mid 90s, and Idaho's the only state where a car ran me off the road. But I appreciate that, because you see kind of the entitlement in drivers, like, get out of my way, this is my road. So I think any education we can do is good, as well as I think then if we expand our vision of what transportation is beyond, roads and bridges for cars and trucks, we start to create a different sense of culture with what a road does, right? And if we can, going back to my previous point, think about a transportation system holistically, instead of just that 2-lane highway or 4-lane highway, I think that benefits everyone. I'm interested in getting more cars off the road to decrease congestion and mitigate that, as well as increase our quality of life. So I want our legislature to expand our vision in that and really push ourselves.
So my thought is on both sides, we need more education because, I don't think that when you're driving a vehicle or driving a bike, you should not know or anticipate what the other is supposed to be doing. I ride bikes, my son rides, my family rides bikes. I think we all do, right? So that's not it. However, I do think that perspective, right? I mean, I got hit with a bike. I was in my car and got hit with a bike. So I'm on the other side of that. But I just think it's important for us to understand and anticipate what the other is supposed to do. So.
I agree with that statement, because I've ridden with some people, with other bicyclists, and I thought that they were acting inappropriately as a bicyclist. Sometimes you'll see, we have a bicycle path along the highway up here, which is separate from, with the green zone in between, or with grass in between and a rail. Then you sometimes see the bikes up on the highway still. And if there is an opportunity to get off the highway, should be. And so it just comes down to people respecting the other mode of transportation.
Sure.
Well, and I just want to say, I want to applaud the folks who actually worked very hard to get driver's ed to highlight bicycle bikes within their training. And I know Lisa Brady was instrumental in making that happen. And so, that was the first place in which to have that conversation for drivers to get comfortable with cyclists on the road. And so I do just want to say kudos to you guys for working hard on that.
Thanks, everybody. Great discussion. I'm going to just read one comment that Eric Parker made in the chat. Well, he says, getting cars off the road requires taking a real look at additional alternatives to vehicles like public transportation and e-bikes and e-scooters. So what he's saying is, we talk about congestion mitigation as widening roads and widening intersections to move cars more quickly. What he's saying is, to get some of the cars off the road, let's make sure that we have ways for people to get around other than driving a car, especially within a community, right? So that's where sidewalks come in. Cyclists love protected bike lanes. I know there are a few who do like to share the road with cars, but most do not. And if we gave them a dedicated space away from cars, I think everybody would be a lot happier on our roads. So it's a good point. Another question I have is from Deanna Smith. She says, I'd like to hear thoughts on how to spend the federal transportation dollar increase, and if you support widening I-84 or using it elsewhere, for example, safety improvements. So this is playing off of our prior presentation where Beth talked about states have flexibility on how they choose to spend these dollars. Deanna, do you want to add anything to that question, or should we just go ahead and let legislators answer it?
I was particularly interested in, I don't know if this is true, but I've heard that one of the things ITD is considering doing, which would probably eat up a lot of those dollars, is widening I-84 to 5 lanes between Boise and Caldwell, which personally I would disagree with. I think it's the wrong priority. I think it also takes a lot of our dollars and puts them in one small part of the state. So it's in reference kind of to that spending, but really broadly just, what would you like to see the state do with those federal dollar increases that we're getting over the next few years?
Who would like to go first on that?
I haven't heard of any. Go ahead.
Go
ahead, Senator.
I was just going to make the point that I think I heard a little bit in your conversation in the previous hour, making the distinction between urban and rural. There are different levels of how much money you can expect to put into alternative modes of transportation when it's a few hardy people may be able to ride their bicycle around in northern Idaho in the winter, but it's not realistic transportation to go 20 miles in the winter on the side of an icy road. And so making the distinction, and I think the best way to make that distinction between urban and rural is to provide the funding, but then let the communities decide how to spend that money. And so it just, the answer looks so much different in Boise than it does in the rural areas, not in Sandpoint, but between Sandpoint and Bonners Ferry, or between Sandpoint and Coeur d'Alene. The answers are all different. And so that's where I going back to that LTAC model of making the money available and then letting local transportation agencies or entities prioritize and make their needs known, and then get that money out to them.
And Cynthia, I can jump in. I'll jump in here too. And, to Senator Woodward's point, yes, I think the local jurisdictions have a lens of what is the best fit for their communities, rather than the state making a determination. Making it available to them is probably in everyone's best interest. While widening of I-84, I've heard about it, but I don't know the details yet. I'm a big proponent of public transportation, and to Senator's point, public transportation in Ada County certainly is going to look much different than whatever it potentially could be in northern Idaho. And so, as we've got this influx of dollars, I would like to see us explore a infrastructure for public transportation, but we also have quite the backlog for maintenance, and that is just going to continue to grow if we don't address it. And so while we've got this backlog, I'd like to see several of those dollars go to our maintenance and bringing that up to conditions that are appropriate and that are going to be maintained for the long term. We need to invest in what we've already have on the streets, and we've got to fix it. Right now in several of our communities, many of them, I heard somewhat Glenn's Ferry is reverting back to dirt because the cost associated with maintaining their roadways certainly exceeds what's available to them. And so while we've got these dollars coming in, we're going to have to examine what do we have already in place that needs to be fixed, and what can we, funnel dollars towards that. What can we do to enhance our public transportation? I'm a big proponent in Ada County now, but that doesn't apply to everywhere else around the state. And so we have to recognize that. And then, if we can invest in public transportation to reduce the congestion on I-84, then let's do it. Although we still have, that is the main corridor for freight, that is the main corridor for commerce. And so all of those things have to be taken into account to find a balanced system that's going to meet everybody's needs. But first and foremost, the lens of our communities is important. And I think our communities need to make those decisions for themselves.
I would offer, with this backlog of maintenance, that was the first thing that came to my mind, is that we do have bridges and things that are deteriorating. And that is a result of not maintaining them as we should have in the long run. And that's what I was kind of talking about earlier, is we tighten our budget and tighten our belt so hard that we don't invest when the things we need. We have schools crumbling, bridges crumbling. We have to do better there instead of provide. I know my colleagues probably disagree with me on that, but I know I get letters from my constituents over and over saying, hey, I don't need an income tax rebate. I need you to invest this in things that are well overdue. I have a folder full of them, right? So I think, that speaks to the backlog. We've got to take care of that. Love Senator Woodward's point. Don't need to repeat that. And I would love to see an investment in a transit system between Boise, Nampa, Caldwell. We talked about that rail system. Boy, wouldn't that be awesome? And then increase the bus systems in each of those and take some of the cars off of I-84 so we don't have to keep building and putting the money there over and over and over. So that's just my 2 cents.
I agree with that. I think we built so much starting in the 1950s, between the 50s and 70s. And so now we have a lot of infrastructure that's 50 to 70 years old. It's past its life. And that's where I fully expect to see the budget proposal this year coming from the governor to show a large investment in these small rural bridges, all the other little parts of this, the local transportation system.
Well, and Cynthia, I want to just jump in really quick to add to the point about expanding public transit. So when we look at our housing crisis, I mean, explore other means in which to address the housing crisis. If we can make, getting to a rural set, our suburban areas of Boise, maybe Kuna Meridian and such, and we can make that transportation a little bit more affordable and a little bit quicker, then maybe we're going to also expand the options for housing. Right now, you could buy a house in Kuna for a lot cheaper than you can in Boise, but you work in Boise. So you're oftentimes going to look to Boise as the hub for which you want to find housing. Well, if we can find a means to make transportation easier and affordable, then maybe folks can broaden their look for affordable housing.
All great points. This is a great conversation, and I hate it that we're limited on time. I'd love to just keep you here all day and keep talking about these things. But I want to get to some other questions. Lisa Brady asked this question. Could we support updated language for safe passing? So she's going to talk about, let's see. She's our Safe Routes to School coordinator, for those of you who don't know who she is. She says safe passing not defined at the state level. She'd like to see language stating change lanes to pass. So that's when a motorist passes a cyclist. Right now, it's up to each city or county to determine what safe passing distance actually is, and it becomes confusing. Something we've learned during COVID is that 3 feet is too close. And 3 feet is too close. I agree with you, Lisa, on that. Would anybody like to share their thoughts on a safe passing bill?
I'm looking towards the others. All right, I'll just jump in. They're not so eager. Well, I will say, I recall when this bill came forward beforehand, I think it was my freshman term, and some of the concerns had more or less to do with our rural communities who said, if I recall, it's if you scoot over 3 feet, then you're into oncoming traffic. And a lot of legislators couldn't wrap their head around what that potentially, a lot of legislators were concerned, and rightfully so. And so while change lanes to pass stipulation within it, certainly I guess that would be appropriate in communities that have several vehicle travel lanes. I don't know. I would be curious to see if that comes back again, see if the legislature will stomach a revision to what was tried a couple of years ago. But I don't think the sentiment has changed. People are more concerned, scooting over 3 feet. While I do see the importance of it, scooting over 3 feet in some of these rural communities puts people into oncoming traffic, and that has some people concerned. While I don't expect people to do that, rightfully so, you should just probably slow down until it's safe to pass would make more sense. And maybe that's back to that point about driver's education and being able to emphasize what is passing cyclists, what does that look like for vehicles, really is an educational piece where there's opportunity already underway in our driver's education classes.
Lisa, do you want to talk a little bit about your thoughts on this? I know you have some pretty strong feelings, but I'd like to add also that I think we're one of 7 states that doesn't have a safe passing law. Is that right?
Probably.
Mm-hmm.
So Lisa Brady from the Treasure Valley Safe Routes to School program, and also Treasure Valley Cycling Alliance. And I serve on a couple of other bicycle and pedestrian advisory committees locally, county and state level. And I do teach the driver's ed parts that I can about biking and walking to students, as well as the teachers of driver's ed across the state. And the safe passing bill that I hope would come up would be treating a bicyclist as another vehicle operator. And when we look at the motor vehicle codes for the state, we see that a bicycle is defined as a vehicle. We know that and I am a car driver, to be clear, and I also ride a bike and walk and use other forms of transportation, but, and I grew up in Orofino, just so you know. We should be treating a person walking on the side of the road or biking on the side of the road in any city any county and any state road that we're operating on, just like we would any other vehicle. Changing lanes to pass is important. I've seen a man on far out on State Street, close to Eagle, up against the Jersey barrier like this as a pedestrian walking, as a driver drove towards him on purpose to harass him. I've seen that same kind of behavior on rural roads around the state. I know of kids that have been hit up in Orfino. I know that there are traffic issues in Sandpoint, Coeur d'Alene, all over the place. And how can we encourage people to get out of a car if we can't put laws in place and safe places for people to operate? How can we make it different if we don't do that? That safe passing thing, I understand logging trucks. I grew up in a logging community. Orfino, when I grew up there, was logging. And I know what it's like to operate around logging trucks. I've also ridden down Vancouver Island on Highway 19 from the top to the bottom with logging trucks on a bicycle and had them change lanes to pass. Why do we have a hard time here in thinking about our own driver training? We slow down first, assess the danger in front of us, make a decision to do something, execute that decision without executing the person on the side of the road. And I will stand down.
Thanks, Lisa. Appreciate it. We're running out of time, so I'll just see if anybody else would like to answer that question, because I do want to get one more question in. Okay, I think we're going to move on. Lisa, thank you so much for that important question. I think it is a really valuable topic, and I hope that we explore it further for the next session. Elaine, you have your hand up, and you are going to be our last person asking a question. We have 4 minutes. Thanks.
Thank you, Cynthia. So I just would like to follow up on the transit discussion, because I hear this a lot. We need transit in this valley. Let's do it. Gosh, we're growing so much, and yet there's a real disparity in how we pay for transit and how we pay for highways. Frankly, the new bill that, if it does get passed, contains a lot of money. $2 billion will come to Idaho, and almost all of it can be spent very, very flexibly. It does not have to be spent on highways. It could be spent on transit. But we've repeatedly seen the state unwilling to spend any of that money on transit. And so what we have is an ability to widen highways, and they get widened and more people drive and there's more congestion, and no ability to invest in transit so that we don't have to widen the highways. By my calculations, it would cost close to $1.5 to $2 billion to widen the freeway, that one extra lane that Deanna talked about. We could pay for regional rail on the existing rail system for $15 million a year, which is less than the debt service on $1.5 billion. So if we can make the conservative fiscal case for transit, is the state willing to invest in helping us move around in a different way?
We're back down to the final few minutes, so feel free to go ahead and answer quickly. Senator Wintrow, please.
As you've already heard me say, I fully support that flexibility and that investment. And I think it's about changing the culture and educating the legislature as times change, and that our community, there's a huge region of our state now. It's not just Boise, it's the whole corridor out to Oregon, right? And so I think some of it is about changing the culture and educating folks to help them understand that fiscal case and how it's going to increase quality of life. And, getting all of the legislators in this region on the same page, like Representative Holtzclaw. I'll turn it over to him on that note.
I don't know why, Senator. I don't know why. Okay, so in my view, so we've had a huge growth in population. That is true. My quality of life has dramatically decreased. I went to Lowe's the other day. It took me 30 minutes to go get a washer. So there's definitely a problem. There's a lot of solutions. I don't know one city in America that mass transit had either isn't a loss leader, or that had stopped the roads from being widened. It's probably something that as we move forward, we will have to look at more. I think there's 500,000 people here in the MSA here. So if you look at that based upon the user, the ridership, how much it will cost, I don't know if it is cost efficient. I haven't seen any numbers in relation to that. I'm glad to look at that. I think this is a conversation that I've been here 27 years, and this conversation I heard since I moved here. So a mass transit. I mean, we have double the people we have now than, I mean, I think when I moved Meridian, it was like 15 or 20 grand or something. Now it's 110. It's crazy. So definitely an issue. So we definitely need to think about that and talk about that as we move forward. And I'm not trying to pass the buck or any of those kind of things. But I hate to invest in something that it's going to cost us money to maintain, and nobody's going to use it.
Hey,
I would hate to do
Can I
that.
jump in there?
Let me ask, can I ask one quick question real quick, Representative? I wonder if it'd be possible to get a group of state leaders in this region together with some of the local leaders to say, okay, what are some of the solutions? Let's look at that data and maybe partner and kind of collaborate and problem solve on that.
Well, yeah, and we probably should, absolutely. And as you know, the MSA is really the fastest growing place. I mean, Meridian's one of the fastest growing cities in the nation. So, I mean, we know it better than most, right? So it is a conversation that we have to have. And I mean, because it's not going to get any, I don't think there's going to be less cars on the road tomorrow than there are today. That's all I'm saying.
Well, I'll jump in there, and Elaine or Councilwoman Clegg, I'm a huge proponent of transportation, have been for years. One of the things is, this is a conversation we have been having, and we've had it for years up until this point. And so while we have this influx of dollars coming in, fund regarding, into Idaho, it's past the point. We do need to look at either preserving right of way in which to make these enhancements, but also we have people moving into the state from other states that have public transportation and a robust transportation system. And so a lot of them have expectations to come into Idaho and to have those tools and that transit opportunity available to them, and they don't have it. So we're past the point of conversations, whereas I think we're at that point of action, and with dollars we can. More importantly, if we look at our transportation and investment into transit, we can also look at transit-oriented development, where we're encouraging people to, develop their lives around where they live and where they're coming from. If TODs can put in place with our rails or bus rapid transit is a little bit harder because you can do transit-oriented development, but buses move, whereas rail doesn't. And so investment into those areas where we can invest in TODs, we're going to see that influx of dollars coming into, and that's an affordable housing opportunity. We can create housing elsewhere, and it doesn't have to be in the downtown core. So I would rather see some action with these dollars coming in, although I do know that bridges and culverts are going to be number one-time maintenance opportunities and enhancements is going to be up there. I have yet to see some transit dollars dedicated yet. And so, or even talk of that. I'd like to see more talk of it. We're past that point. The metropolitan planning, the Compass has already come out and said rail or some sort of bus rapid transit's a necessity. We need to look at means in which to make that happen. So I love the conversations. Senator Wintrow, I support us getting together and talking about it. But when it comes to the legislature, what occurs in Ada County is certainly what's different elsewhere throughout the state. And so while we see the congestion and the need for transit enhancements, other areas of the state don't. They have roads that are dilapidated that need maintenance. That's where their dollars need to be spent. Certainly the local communities can tell us best on how to spend those dollars.
Well, thank you, everyone. I think we're out of our time here, but I wanted to give a personal thank you for each of you. I think Cynthia and everyone can agree. I think this was the best discussion we've had at one of these conferences, and I appreciate each of our legislators for taking the time out of their day to visit with us and share their perspective and to listen to what we had to say. So personal thank you, and I hope everyone else can give a thank you for these folks for coming out today.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Lance. Thank you to our